With Carabao Cup and FA Cup results now finally locked in, we can start to take a proper look at our FPL transfer plans going into Double Gameweek 25 and beyond. Right then, so let's dive straight in and take a look at what the FA Cup and the Carabao Cup results mean for FPL over the next few game weeks. And the reason that a lot of our transfer plans were put on hold was because if certain teams made it through in the FA Cup or went out of the FA Cup, and certain teams went through in the Carabao Cup to the final, it changes the fixtures that are going to go ahead in these 2 game weeks. Now, game week 29 is first up. That's the one that we know with a lot more certainty at the moment. Now, as you can see on screen, there are only 8 fixtures currently locked in for game week 29. That's because the Liverpool-Aston Villa game and the Newcastle-Crystal Palace game can no longer go ahead in game week 29 because they've made it, or at least Liverpool and Newcastle have made it to the Carabao Cup final, which goes ahead in the same period of time as game week 29. In Liverpool's case, it means that their fixture against Aston Villa has been brought forward. In Newcastle's case, it won't be brought forward to game week 25 like Liverpool's has been, but it will probably have to go into a different game week at some later date. There is a very slim possibility that it could still go ahead in game week 29. I'll leave that one to the fixture analysts, but it's very, very unlikely, and most people are assuming now that it will almost certainly not go ahead in game week 29. In game week 34, it's a little bit trickier to forecast at the moment because it's further away, and we need to rely on further future results as well. But what we know so far is on screen, all of the teams with a red cross next to them are already out of the FA Cup, and therefore they themselves won't have a fixture in the FA Cup that weekend in game week 34. Now, if both teams from the game week 34 fixture are already out of the FA Cup, as you can see, Chelsea versus Everton and Liverpool versus Tottenham, because they're both out of the FA Cup in both fixtures, we know for certain that their fixture in game week 34 will go ahead because there won't be a clash between the FA Cup semi-finals and their game week 34 fixture. There are also a few teams that are out of the FA Cup, but their opponents in game week 34 aren't yet. But there are still another few rounds to go before we hit the semi-finals, and that fixture would have a clash if their other team get to the FA Cup semi-final. Now, Arsenal Crystal Palace, obviously if Crystal Palace don't make it through all the way to the semi-final, which on balance of probabilities is relatively unlikely, then their fixture will go ahead in game week 34, and so on with all of the other teams that have one team with a red cross next to them. Now, what all of that means is that because Liverpool, Tottenham, Chelsea, Everton are already out, and there are a few other pretty big teams with a lot of FPL interest in them that are already out of the FA Cup, all it takes now is 1 or 2 other teams to also go out, and it looks like game week 34 isn't going to be the most difficult game week to navigate as a blank. There are a lot of teams in there that you can cover off, Liverpool especially at the moment, but also Chelsea, maybe Spurs, maybe Everton, where if you've got players from those teams, you might be able to run through game week 34 without needing a free hit. What it does also mean, though, is those teams, Liverpool, Tottenham, Chelsea, Everton, because they're not blanking in game week 34, they also won't have that fixture moved so that they double in game week 33. Now, again, that might make it slightly easier to navigate because you can just hold on to the same players from those teams through those 2 game weeks, but it also means that you'll have less doublers in game week 34 if you were to hold your Liverpool, hold your Tottenham, Chelsea, Everton, and so on. So there's less variance there, but what it does mean is game week 34 might be easier to navigate, whereas game week 29, as I've already mentioned, is missing out on some pretty key FPL assets. You've got Liverpool missing out, you've got Aston Villa, who both double in game week 25, so a lot of us are loading up on them right now, and also Newcastle and Crystal Palace are pretty interesting FPL-wise right now. Isak, Hall, Gordon, Mateta, maybe Munoz at the back as well. There's plenty of FPL interest there, and you might not want to have to sell all of those players from those 4 teams going into game week 29. Now, because game week 34 isn't going to be quite as difficult to navigate, it might make game week 29 more appealing to use a free hit on. Now, what that all means for our transfer plans, I'll go into throughout the video, but it does mean that you might not need to worry about making transfers with game week 29 in mind over the next few game weeks, because you might want to use a free hit that week. Obviously, it's very team dependent, but I just wanted to flag it now in case you weren't aware or maybe just needed a little explainer on how those 2 game weeks are going to map out. Right then, so let's take a look at my transfer plans going into double game week 25. Of course, Liverpool and Aston Villa both doubling. I've already got a triple up of Liverpool assets, that being Trent, Salah and Gakpo, which I think is pretty ideal, other than the fact that Trent is currently yellow flagged. Now, he does have Everton to play in game week 24 still. He's pretty 50-50 to play in that game. If he does, then obviously there's no concern for game week 25. But if he doesn't, then maybe there's something clever I could do with Trent here and maybe pivot to a different Liverpool asset elsewhere. I'll go into that in just a moment's time, but more likely than not, I think Trent will probably be okay for Wolves at home, and therefore I'm going to stick with the Liverpool triple up as it is. I do, however, have my assistant manager chip active. Now, because it's David Moyes away at Crystal Palace, no table bonus, no home fixture, and also because it's Palace, there's maybe obviously a chance of a victory, but it's not the biggest chance of a victory ever, and no double game week either. So I'm definitely going to pivot away from David Moyes. That's going to be my first of 3 free transfers. Now, the obvious one to go for is Unai Emery, 0.8 million, so I've got the money in the bank to do it without needing another move, 0.3 remaining afterwards as well. And looking at the fixtures, Ipswich at home, Liverpool at home is a pretty good set of double game week fixtures for a manager to have. Now, Ipswich at home is a good opportunity for a win. It's a good opportunity for goals and possibly even a clean sheet as well. And then Liverpool is that free swing, that table bonus fixture. And Villa at home have been very, very strong this season. So it wouldn't be the biggest surprise in the world if they were able to pull off something against Liverpool at home. However, the caveat here is that Chelsea at home in game week 26 is obviously not a great fixture to have because at present, it's not eligible for table bonus. Now, with that in mind, it's not impossible that certain Premier League results go certain ways and there is a table bonus available, in which case I might not change my manager, but it's very likely that I'll need to use another free transfer in game week 26 to get rid of Emery and pick another manager with a bit more upside or a better fixture to have. Now, I think right now, as it stands, Emery is my preferred choice, but he's not the only choice. I could go for someone like an Arteta, who's got 2 single game week fixtures that look pretty appealing in the next 2 game weeks. However, I can't actually get to him without using an extra free transfer and downgrading elsewhere. So that would be another consideration. And also, I wouldn't get the extra game across the next 2 fixtures as well with Arteta. I could go for Silva, 1.1 million, a little bit more expensive, and he does have Nottingham Forest at home, which is eligible for table bonus and about a 40% chance of a win with the bookies. That's quite tempting, but overall, I think I do currently prefer the extra fixture that Emery gives me, even if it does tie me in to another free transfer next week more than likely. Now, if I make that move, and I'll just keep it on the graphic here with 0.3 in the bank, I've got 2 free transfers left, and of course, no players represented in the Villa ranks. Now, the most obvious pick is probably in the midfield, but I'll talk about the defence very quickly. I'm honestly really not that tempted there. They've kept 3 clean sheets this season, I believe. 1.25 XGC per 90 isn't bad by any means, but I'm pretty happy with my defence for this game week and beyond. And any Villa asset that I bring in this week, okay, great, they've got Ipswich at home, that's a decent chance for a clean sheet. But after that, even the Liverpool game, the second fixture, there's almost no chance of a clean sheet there, or very, very unlikely. Chelsea, Palace, Brentford, blank, Brighton, Forest. It's not a great run where I'd be comfortable starting my Villa defenders or goalkeeper, especially considering they haven't really kept that many clean sheets this season, 3 in the league so far, or at least Martinez has. So I'm not that tempted. They've got Konza probably out as well after pulling up against Spurs in the FA Cup. And Digne isn't reliable enough on minutes that I'd want to go there either. So overall, not that interested in the defence. Up front, Ollie Watkins would be interesting and I might be tempted to go for him over Alexander Isak. But again, he's got a muscular injury. He might not be fit for the first fixture against Ipswich at home. And that is the nice fixture. So again, I'm not that tempted to go there for the price, for the injury risk. And considering how good Isak's been, I'd probably want to get back to him pretty quickly as well. So that might be locking me into another free transfer down the line. So Ollie Watkins is probably ruled out for me as well, which leaves me with the Villa midfielders. Now, the obvious one is Rodgers, but let's have a quick look maybe at Rashford and Asensio as well. Now, Rashford came off the bench, as did Asensio. Asensio, by the way, looked pretty decent coming off the bench against Spurs, but they were just cameo appearances, and Unai Emery's going to have his work cut out trying to figure out exactly what setup Villa are going to use going into Game Week 25 and beyond with these new signings. Obviously, it's great that they've got the depth, but it's not great for expected minutes for the likes of Rashford, Asensio, Bailey, McGinn, all of these players. And there's a very few Villa players that I'd say are reliable enough that I'd want to pick them going into Game Week 25, knowing their minutes are going to be very good. Rashford should be rejuvenated under a new manager, but he hasn't played a Premier League game in a long, long time. So to go for him now, especially when I don't have the money to do it for someone like an Amad Diallo, I'd have to sell an Mbeumo, a Palmer, or a Salah. There's just no way that I'm going there. Same with Asensio as well. I can't afford it for any other players other than that 3 in the midfield there that I'm highlighting. So that leaves one player, and that is, of course, Morgan Rodgers. 5.6 million. I've got the exact money to do it by selling Amad Diallo. I could sell any of my other 4 midfielders, but quickly reminding you who that is. Salah, no way. Palmer away at Brighton. He scored 4 goals against Brighton, I think it was, earlier on in the season. Let's just double check that. Yes, 4 goals against Brighton. And although he's not been in the greatest form ever, we've got Brighton, Villa, Southampton, Leicester, and then Spurs after the Game Week 29 fixture against Arsenal. It's a great run, so there's no way I'm getting rid of Palmer. Mbeumo as well has a great set of fixtures, all green across the ticker there over the next 3. And Semenyo, very similar. I'd argue even Bournemouth midfielders are even slightly better buys than Aston Villa buys over the next few game weeks too. So again, Southampton away from home, followed by Wolves, Brighton, Spurs, Brentford, Ipswich. The list goes on. It's a really good run of fixtures. And maybe, arguably, just having Semenyo isn't going to be enough for me. I might want more Bournemouth midfielders. So there's no way I'm getting rid of him. So that leaves Amad Diallo. Now, obviously, Amad Diallo has been pretty good this season at times. 13 attacking returns so far, I believe. Yeah, that's correct. Although he hasn't returned in the last 3 Premier League games, the data's not been that bad. And again, with the fixtures to come, Spurs, Everton, Ipswich, and then Leicester after Game Week 28 against Arsenal, it's a pretty good run as well. Now, obviously, also, it depends on my strategy moving forwards. I've already discussed the fact that Villa will blank in Game Week 29. Well, Man United won't, and they've got Leicester away from home. So if I didn't want to free hit in Game Week 29, it would make sense to keep hold of players like Amad Diallo, because that's a great fixture. And removing him now would take me one further transfer away from having a good side for Game Week 29 without using the free hit. So a lot of this comes down to whether or not I want to free hit in Game Week 29. If I were to load up on more Villa options, then obviously it takes me further towards free hitting that game week because I won't have the free transfers to get away from the side I've already got. I've already got 2 Newcastle, I've got 3 Liverpool, I'd have an Aston Villa in there as well. It gets trickier and trickier to navigate Game Week 29 if I keep loading up on those players. Now, Rodgers in particular is an interesting one. Now, the data this season's not been too bad, but it is a smidge under what Amad Diallo's is, and he hasn't actually returned in the last 3 Premier League games. That hasn't stopped him from returning in all the other competitions, though, so I wouldn't really pay too much attention to the Premier League form necessarily. And of course, Ipswich at home is a low-hanging fruit. It's a great opportunity for him to get on the score sheet or to get something against Ipswich. After that, Liverpool is again that free swing, but you're not expecting too much. He might obviously get something out of that. It's not impossible. But again, after that, like we talked about with the Villa defence, Chelsea, Palace, Brentford, blank, Brighton. It's not the best run ever. And actually, I'd argue that Bournemouth assets, you could look at Man United assets as well, like Amad Diallo, overall and up until Game Week 29 have a better set of fixtures for attacking returns. So do I really want Rodgers enough that he's worth spending an extra transfer on to get in, but then also probably another extra transfer to get rid of in the next few game weeks, even if I'm not free hitting because of those fixtures, especially when I've only got a few free transfers left. If I use this one, I'd have 1 free transfer remaining this week. That would leave me 2 next week, Again, I'm using one free transfer on an assistant manager next week as well. So it kind of backs me into a bit of a corner. The other thing with Rodgers to note is he's already on 8 yellow cards. If he gets to 10, that's a 2-game week ban. So it wouldn't be impossible to think that by the time we get to around game week 28, 29, he'll have a 2-game week ban anyway. So that could be a real problem if I bring in Rodgers now. Of course, if you've already got him, you absolutely hold on to him. It's a great double for him, but I'm not sure if it's worth me going and buying him now. And I'm pretty on the fence as to whether the transfer from Amad Diallo to Rodgers is going to pay off for me in the long term, even if it did this game week. Especially because Amad Diallo away at Spurs, that's a great opportunity for attacking returns, as we saw with Rodgers in the FA Cup. So I'm not massively convinced on that. There are Bournemouth options in the midfield as well that I'd actually really be tempted by. I can't get to Kluivert, sadly, with one free transfer from Amad Diallo, and I'm not selling any of my other midfield for. But Altara could be really interesting. At 5.1, I could get there very easily. And again, if I wanted to double up on that Bournemouth midfield, that is a fantastic run all the way through to the time where I'd be looking at wildcarding. It all comes down to whether or not I think he continues to start, and given his form recently, I don't really see too much risk there. So he's a very interesting option, but on balance of probabilities, I think I'm probably going to leave it with this midfield 5 right now. I don't think I need to massively force the transfers. And with this 5 in midfield, I'm really happy with the setup for game week 25, even if it's got only one double game weeker in there, but also afterwards going into the next few game weeks as well. Now, looking at my forward line, I do have Isak, Gakpo, and annoyingly, João Pedro. Now, Gakpo's obviously not going anywhere. Because I'm not looking at selling Isak for someone like a Watkins, it's likely that I hold on to him, although I am a little bit tempted by the likes of Mateta, for instance. No double game week for Palace, but if I was looking at free hitting in game week 29, he as an option is looking really appealing. As you can see, great fixtures running up to game week 29. Coming out of 29, he's got Southampton followed by Brighton. Even the Man City fixture might not be that bad either. And he's in phenomenal form at the moment. I think that's 6 attacking, or 6 goals even, in the last 5 game weeks. The data is looking better week on week as well. So I am tempted by Mateta, but because I can't really get to him from a João Pedro, for instance, I do want to hold on to Isak because he's been brilliant. Although didn't return against Fulham, the form as of late, as you can see, running all the way back to game week 14, has been brilliant. The data's amazing, and once this little patch of 3 fixtures is out of the way, if I am free hitting in game week 29, then I can run him through all the way to game week 35 without worrying. And again, West Ham before the free hit, Brentford, Leicester afterwards, it's a great run. So I don't massively want to sell Isak. And that leaves João Pedro. Now, obviously, he's been incredibly frustrating, not a good FPL pick whatsoever. I did have 3 attacking returns from him against Arsenal and Aston Villa. Outside of that, it's been horrendous. At 5.5 million, he's not taking up a massive amount of my budget, but whatever way I want to play it, he's not been a good pick. However, I'm benching him in game week 25 against Chelsea at home. He's got Southampton away from home in game week 26. That's if he plays, by the way. He did get brought off at halftime against Nottingham Forest. And then he also didn't play, or didn't start at least, in the FA Cup against Chelsea, in what was a very strong lineup for Brighton. So that's one that I'm pretty concerned about. But he is a leader. He is one of their best players. So I'd be surprised if he didn't come back in and play against Southampton, for instance. With that in mind, though, it is a risk, and I might need to look at moving away from him in the next couple of game weeks. I can bench him in game week 25, and if we just filter it by forwards, there aren't really a lot of forwards that I'd massively want to go for that I can afford, because I've only got 0.3 in the bank. I might have 0.0 if I went for Rodgers over at Amad Diallo. Looking at the options available to me, there's not a whole plethora of players that I'm massively tempted by. Raul Jimenez doesn't have a double game week in 25. It's an okay run of fixtures, but I don't think it's necessarily worth the free transfer right now, especially because I'm benching João Pedro anyway. Delap is fairly similar, obviously scored against Southampton. Before that, hadn't returned in 3. But the fixtures, again, they're not looking that tempting. Vardy, probably not. And Ndai, again, probably not that interesting. There's not a whole lot here that I can afford to get to in one free transfer that I'm really tempted by. So João Pedro probably stays for another week. I might be able to do something clever once I've got rid of my manager and I've got a little bit more in the bank. I could go for someone like a Mateta if I can maybe downgrade another position or two. So with all of that in mind, if Trent is fit for game week 25, then it's looking pretty simple. I can go for Emery, I might go for Rodgers, but outside of that, it's looking like I'm going to leave it as is and go in with 4 to 5 double game weekers, that being the triple up of Liverpool, then Emery, possibly Rodgers instead of Amad Diallo. However, I will have to be quick on that transfer. I've got to monitor the price changes because if Rodgers goes up or Amad comes down, then I'm going to be priced out. So that's something to consider. Now, I did mention at the start of the video that Trent is a risk for game week 25 at the moment. Now, obviously, we'll have more information based on the Everton game, but if he were to be out, it does open up some other avenues for me. So let's say that Trent doesn't play against Everton and he's a massive risk for Wolves at home, and I'm going to have to transfer him out. Now, if I get rid of Trent, I could look at one of maybe two options that I'm really tempted by. Number one would probably be Kirkez at Bournemouth. Now, again, we've gone through the Bournemouth fixtures. They look really good. But then also, I'm really tempted by the likes of Daniel Munoz. Now, Munoz, again, will have the blank game week in 29, but it depends on my strategy here. If I wanted to free hit in game week 29, Munoz is probably perfect. As we mentioned, great fixtures before and after, and the underlying attacking data, I just want to highlight here, 0.16 XG per 90 for a defender is phenomenal. His positions in attacking phases for Crystal Palace are absolutely ridiculous, at times right up there alongside Mateta. So I don't think it's going to be crazy to suggest that he keeps getting the sort of returns he's gotten in the last couple of game weeks. Great fixtures, good price and differential. I do like Daniel Munoz a lot. The other option, of course, is Kirkez. Now, looking at Kirkez quickly, the benefit here is that he doesn't blank in game week 29. So if I didn't want to free hit, I could go for Kirkez instead. It obviously saves me a lot of money. The fixtures are great all the way through to game week 34. The data's not quite as good, but I need to make my mind up very quickly on whether or not a free hit in game week 29 is going to be the optimal play for me, or whether I just want to run through it with free transfers. Now, all of this is if Trent is out. If he is out, then let's put in Kirkez just for argument's sake right now. Then I've got 2.9 to spend elsewhere. So I could, in that case, look at upgrading Moyes to Arne Slot because I've got the money to do so. And it gives me that Liverpool triple up again. It also doesn't give me an extra Liverpool player that would blank in game week 29 because by that time Slot will be long gone from my side. And because I've got rid of Trent as well, I'm one step closer to being able to run through game week 29 without a free hit. So again, I'd have 1.9 in the bank. I could therefore maybe upgrade João Pedro to someone 7.4 or below. That does open up a few other options for me, even Mateta, but also someone like a Chris Wood, who's got a great fixture in game week 29 away at Ipswich. Now, obviously, not great fixtures between then and now, but overall might not be a bad play considering he continues to hurt me. The other option, of course, is Yoane Wissa at 6.3 million. Great fixtures all the way through to game week 29 as well. So if Trent is out, then that opens up a number of avenues for me to maybe not have to free hit in game week 29 and gives me free money to use on upgrading Moyes to Slot rather than Emery. So I'm waiting on my transfers for as long as I possibly can because the longer I wait, the more information I'll have on Trent, and then I can make an informed decision on whether I want to pivot my strategy across to Arne Slot or stick with my current plan, which is going for Emery over Moyes and then possibly also going for Morgan Rodgers as well. Although, like I said, that's pretty 50-50 as it stands. Now, as we wrap up today's video, leave a comment below letting me know what your thinking is ahead of game week 25. What transfer plans are you looking at making? And importantly, how many Liverpool and Aston Villa players are you looking to have in your side going into the deadline? And as always, any questions, do leave them in the comments as well, and I'll try and get back to you before the Game Week 25 deadline. In the meantime, if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel, that would be greatly appreciated. For now, though, I'll see you ahead of Game Week 25 as we run through my team selection later on this week.